Hey everybody, me again. So in this half of the video, I'm gonna move us through Roland Barthes' theory, the death of the author. I'm gonna say some things about post-structuralism. I'm gonna say some things about the historical contexts in which we can make sense of Roland Barthes' essay, and then maybe kind of tee us up for Friday's class, where we're going to be talking about the relationship between Roland Barthes' ideas and this documentary that I had you watch called "Rip the Remix Manifesto," which I think you can kind of view as a film that, well, it's interesting in its own right, but it's almost like, we can see a sort of 21st version of how the ideas of Roland Barthes circulate now and how they make sense now. So I think you can think of Rip as almost sort of like Barthes' ideas in action. So we're gonna do that. Before we get moving on this video, I encourage you to look up or to have up the PowerPoint that I sent around, I guess this morning, the Roland Barthes PowerPoint. I'm going to be alluding to this PowerPoint periodically so that you have something to kind of something tangible to hang on to when I talk about these ideas. So okay, so a good place, I think, to start with Roland Barthes might be to think about the first text that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, that is Wimsatt and Beardsley's The Intentional Fallacy. Wimsatt and Beardsley and Roland Barthes have at least one thing in common, and it's probably obvious to you, right? Wimsatt and Beardsley and Roland Barthes are invested in undermining or even exploding the authority of the author. Roland Barthes and Wimsatt and Beardsley could sit around a table and agree at least on that historically and traditionally, we all of us readers of texts, critics, whether critics or kind of common readers of texts, we all tend to think about the author as the figure who determines meaning, who has authority over the meaning of a text. Wimsatt and Beardsley say, no, the intention of the author is neither available to us in most circumstances, right? Think Shakespeare, think about our inability to bring Shakespeare back from the dead and ask him, hey, how should we interpret your character Shylock? It's neither available nor particularly relevant, because the job of the new critic, say Wimsatt and Beardsley, say other members of the new critical movement, the job of the reader, the job of the critic, is to understand the text in and of itself as a kind of self-contained meaning-making machine. So, if you're a new critical reader, you're not thinking about author biography, you're not thinking about author intention, but nor are you thinking about things like historical context or social or cultural context. You're not thinking about economics. You're not thinking about geopolitics. You're not thinking about anything apart from language, because for you, the text is the thing. It is, as I've said, a kind of perfectly self-contained meaning-making unit. Roland Barthes would say, yeah, I agree with you on that first part. I agree that historically we give too much authority to the figure of the author, and Barthes, like Wimsatt and Beardsley, rejects the notion that it is the author who determines the meaning of the text. Where they part company, though, is really important. I think what Roland Barthes might say to somebody like Wimsatt and Beardsley is, right, authors don't get to determine the meaning of the text, but it's also the case that the notion of meaning itself is flawed. The notion that texts have a meaning, or even that they have meanings, is a fallacy. It's a problem. It's a misunderstanding of the kind of thing that a literary text is. That's a kind of bold claim, I think, and it's one that is going to take a certain amount of thinking, but I'm going to try to kind of give you a sense of how that concept manifests itself in actual tangible terms in Barthes' theory. Before we do that, though, let's take a look at Roland Barthes' essay. This is where he, I think, sounds very much like Wimsatt and Beardsley. This is on page 143. So have a look at, well, actually the bottom of page 142, the top of 143. This is a passage that I think you can almost imagine being plucked right from Wimsatt and Beardsley's essay. So he says this. This is Roland Barthes. The author is a modern figure, a product of our society insofar as, emerging from the Middle Ages with English empiricism, French rationalism, and the personal faith of the Reformation, it discovered the prestige of the individual, of, as it is more nobly put, the human person. It is thus logical that in literature it should be this positivism, the epitome and culmination of capitalist ideology, which has attached the greatest importance to the person of the author. Okay, I'm just going to pause there and say that when Barthes invokes the specter of capitalism, he's in some ways looking forward to the kind of thing that the directors of the Remix Manifesto are claiming. That when we think of the author as the person who, quote, owns the meaning of a text, we are really in some ways doing the work of capitalism. That kind of assumption suggests that the hegemony of capitalism. It suggests how we have all kind of inured or absorbed the logic of capitalism. So for Barthes, the figure of the author is a specifically capitalist figure. I'm just going to leave you with that notion now, for now, let you kind of mull it over in your head, let you think about how that kind of claim bears itself out in the documentary, and we're going to talk about that next time, okay? So he goes on, he says, the author still reigns in histories of literature, biographies of writers, interviews, magazines, as in the very consciousness of men of letters anxious to unite their person and their work through diaries and memoirs. The image of literature to be found in ordinary culture is tyrannically centered on the author, his person, his life, his tastes, his passions, while criticism still consists for the most part in saying, he goes on from there. So that's a really important thing, and that quotation I have given you a little bit of on the PowerPoint to signal to you, this is a passage that I think you want to think really hard about. I think you may have noticed that Barthes writes in a very different way from Wimsatt and Beardsley and from Stuart Hall. There's a real playfulness to the way that Roland Barthes writes. You can almost think of him as part theorist, part poet. There's a real lyrical quality to his writing. I think that style and substance in Roland Barthes are intimately connected. And what makes Barthes really pleasurable to read is that he's just such a great writer. If you like lyrical, poetic writing, you'll fall in love with Roland Barthes, I think. He uses words advisedly. He uses words carefully. And so when he invokes the notion of tyranny and aligns that idea of tyranny with authorship, we want to think really hard about why that is. I don't think Wimsatt and Beardsley would ever go so far as to say that the author, the figure of the author, has a tyrannical influence over readers. I don't think that authoritarianism is on their mind in the same way that it is. Think about Wimsatt and Beardsley coming out of the Second World War. When you think about tyranny, when you think about authoritarianism, you think about Hitler, you think about Mussolini, you think about Franco. It would be a hell of a thing to claim that authors exert the kind of tyranny that a figure like Hitler exerts over culture. I mean, it would be in abysmally bad taste to suggest that. So they're not going to go so far as to say that the author has a tyrannical influence over readers. Barthes does, though, and I think that that's for a whole host of cultural and social reasons. I'm going to end this video just now, just to keep it short, to manage the file so I can upload it with limited difficulty. In the next video, I'm going to pick up on what Barthes has in mind when he invokes the specter of tyranny. So hold that thought.